The next 2 days were a strange mix of normalcy and unspoken awareness. We went about our work as if nothing had happened. Meetings, updates, but beneath the surface. Every exchange between Ethan and me felt charged, as though we were carrying around a shared secret. On Wednesday afternoon, just as I was preparing to leave, my phone buzzed with a text, "Ethan, still at the office?" I frowned slightly, but replied, "Me, yes. Just packing up." A moment later, "Ethan, come by my office for a second before you go." It was already past 7, the building unusually quiet. I hesitated for a moment before tucking my phone into my bag and making my way down the hall. When I stepped inside, his office was dim except for the soft pool of light from his desk lamp. The city glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, traffic lights blinking in rhythmic patterns. "Close the door," he said quietly. My pulse quickened as I did what he asked. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He shook his head slowly. "No, I just didn't want to say this in the middle of the day." I moved closer to his desk, and he stood, walking around to meet me. For a moment, we simply stood there, the silence thick between us. Then he spoke. "I've been trying to keep things professional. I've been telling myself last Friday was just a drink, just conversation. But I can't pretend anymore." I felt my breath catch. "Ethan, I like you," he said, his voice low but steady. "More than I should, more than is probably smart. But I can't ignore it." My thoughts scattered. There was a part of me that wanted to be rational, to remind him of boundaries and rules. But there was another part, the louder part. Had been waiting to hear those words. "I don't know if this is a good idea," I whispered. "Probably not," he said with a faint, almost rueful smile. "But tell me you haven't felt it too, and I'll never bring it up again." I couldn't. I didn't. Instead, I found myself saying, "I have." He stepped closer, and before I could think better of it, his hand was at my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin. The gesture was slow, almost tentative, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. Then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or desperate at first, just a soft, deliberate meeting of lips, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd been holding back. But as soon as I responded, the restraint began to unravel. His hand slid to the back of my neck, deepening the kiss, and I felt myself leaning into him, my bag slipping unnoticed to the floor. The air between us shifted instantly. Weeks of stolen glances, of unsaid words, had condensed into this one electric moment. My heart pounded as though it were trying to memorize every second. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing harder, our foreheads resting together. "This is dangerous," I murmured. "I know," he said, "but I don't care right now." I should have walked away then, given myself the space to think. But instead, I stayed. We talked quietly, almost in whispers, about nothing and everything, our favorite music, the worst jobs we'd ever had, the things we wished we could change in our lives. It felt intimate, not just because of the kiss, but because of the way he looked at me, like he was letting me see parts of him no one at work ever did. Eventually, he offered to drive me home. I hesitated, knowing that getting into his car would feel like another step we couldn't take back. But I agreed. The ride was quiet at first, filled with the hum of the engine and the occasional sweep of streetlights across his face. About halfway to my apartment, he reached over and took my hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. When we pulled up outside my building, neither of us moved to get out. We just sat there, the city quiet around us, his thumb tracing idle circles on the back of my hand. "Good night," he said eventually, though his voice was reluctant. "Good night," I echoed, though I didn't let go of his hand until the last possible moment. The next day, reality began to creep in. The thrill of what had happened was still there, but so was the weight of the situation. We worked in the same office. He was my boss. This wasn't some harmless flirtation, it had consequences, but avoiding him wasn't possible. That afternoon, he stopped by my desk under the pretense of asking about a report, his tone perfectly neutral for anyone listening. But when he handed me a file, his fingers brushed mine deliberately, and I felt that same jolt of connection. It became a quiet game, passing each other in the hallway, exchanging the smallest of glances, speaking in a tone that was polite on the surface, but carried an undercurrent only we understood. By Friday, I thought maybe we'd settle into this silent, charged limbo. But then came the twist I didn't see coming. That evening, as I was packing up to leave, I overheard two of my coworkers talking in the break room. "Did you hear about Ethan?" one of them whispered. "What about him?" "He's been spotted having dinner with one of the senior partner's daughters. Apparently, it's serious." I froze, my mind instantly replaying every moment from the past week. The dinners, the glances, the kiss. Serious. With someone else. The rational part of me reminded me that Ethan had never promised me anything. We hadn't defined whatever was happening between us, but the emotional part that was harder to quiet. When I saw him later that night, after most people had gone, I asked him about it. "Is it true?" I said, keeping my voice calm. He didn't pretend not to understand. His jaw tightened slightly. "I've had dinner with her. Yes. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Father is important to the firm. We've known each other for years. It's part social, part business, and part romantic." I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. And that silence told me everything. "I didn't plan for this to happen with you," he said finally. "But it did. And now I'm trying to figure out what that means." The words were honest, but they didn't erase the sting. I realized in that moment that whatever unforgettable turn this week had taken, it wasn't going to be simple. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the kiss, the conversations, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the room. But I also thought about the other woman, the one who already had a place in his life, however complicated it might be, and I knew with a sharp clarity that hurt more than I expected, that this was the point where I had to decide. Keep walking this dangerous line, or step back before it pulled me under completely. The problem was, I already knew which choice I was going to make. I woke the next morning with a strange feeling I couldn't quite place. It wasn't exactly guilt, and it wasn't exactly excitement, more like a quiet hum running through my veins, as if last night had left some invisible mark on me. When I arrived at the office, the usual Monday routine unfolded around me. The clatter of keyboards, the soft ring of phones, the smell of burnt coffee from the break room. But I felt different. And I noticed the difference the moment I walked past Ethan's office. He was on a call, leaning back in his chair, one hand resting thoughtfully against his jaw. His eyes flicked up and met mine through the glass, and in that split second, I saw recognition, not the typical good morning acknowledgement. This was something else. His gaze lingered just a fraction longer than it should have, and I felt my breath catch. I quickly looked away and hurried to my desk, telling myself not to overthink it. After all, we just had a drink. People did that. But deep down, I knew. Last night had shifted something neither of us could take back. The day passed in a blur. I threw myself into my work, trying to bury the memory of the warm glow of that booth, the way his eyes had softened in the candlelight. But just after lunch, a message popped up in my email. From Ethan Parker, subject: "Follow-up, I'd like to go over the Baxter proposal with you before it goes to the client." My office, 6:30. I read the message twice, frowning slightly. 6:30. Most of the office would be gone by then. I typed back a simple, "Sure. I'll be there by the time the clock hit 6. The office was almost empty. The hum of the building seemed louder without the chatter of my coworkers to fill it. I gathered my notes and headed toward Ethan's office. He was standing by the window when I entered, looking out at the city as twilight painted the skyline in shades of gold and deep blue. He turned when he heard me, offering a small smile. "Thanks for staying late again," he said. "I know it's been a busy couple of weeks." "No problem," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. We went over the proposal. His tone all business at first. But as the minutes passed, the conversation began to wander about the client, about industry trends, and then somehow back to last night. "Did you get home all right?" he asked casually, though there was an undercurrent in his voice. "I did," I said. "It was a nice walk." He nodded, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "I enjoyed talking to you." The words hung between us, heavier than they should have been. I wasn't sure if he meant it in a professional way or something else. As we wrapped up the discussion, he closed the folder and leaned back slightly. "Are you hungry?" I blinked at him. "Hungry?" "Yeah, I was thinking of ordering something in. We've both had long days." I hesitated for a beat, but my stomach answered for me with a quiet growl. "Sure," I said, smiling a little. He ordered takeout from a nearby place. And while we waited, the conversation flowed more easily. He told me about his early years, starting in the business, about the long hours and the times he'd doubted himself. I found myself sharing things I rarely talked about, how I'd stumbled into this job after a string of positions that never quite fit. How I sometimes felt like I was still figuring out what I wanted from life. "It's not a bad thing," he said quietly, not knowing. "It keeps you open, too. Unexpected turns." There it was again, that subtle suggestion that maybe what was happening between us was one of those unexpected turns. When the food arrived, we sat side by side at the small conference table in his office, the city lights flickering through the windows. At one point, I reached for the soy sauce at the same time he did, and our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Instead, there was that split second too long to be accidental where we both felt it. "You're quiet," he said after a moment, watching me. "I'm just thinking," I replied, avoiding his gaze. I hesitated, then gave him a half smile. "If I tell you, it might make things awkward." "Maybe I don't mind awkward," he said softly. The air in the room felt heavier after that. The conversation shifted again, slower now, each word measured. I could feel the awareness between us, the way his voice dropped just slightly when he spoke, the way his eyes kept drifting to my lips. At one point, he leaned in, not close enough to be inappropriate, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I shouldn't say this," he murmured, "but last night, I didn't want the evening to end." My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. Neither did I admitted before I could stop myself. We held each other's gaze for what felt like an eternity, both of us teetering on the edge of something neither of us could name, but both understood perfectly. Eventually, I stood, forcing myself to break the spell. "I should get going," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "Thank you for staying, for the work, and for last night." I managed a small smile, gathered my things, and left. But even as I stepped into the elevator, I could still feel the heat of his gaze on me, as if some invisible thread connected us, pulling tighter with every passing second. That night, I lay in bed, replaying every detail. The way his tone had softened when he spoke to me. The unguarded moments where his laughter was real, not the polite one he used in meetings. The way he'd looked at Meal like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. It was dangerous. I knew that. He was my boss, and there were rules written and unwritten that should have kept us at a distance. But there was something in the way my pulse quickened when I thought about him, something in the way my mind kept drifting back to that booth. That dinner, that almost too long glance. I didn't know where it was leading, but I had the unsettling, thrilling feeling that this was only the beginning. It was one of those evenings that seemed to stretch on forever, the kind where the ticking of the clock felt louder than usual, and the fluorescent lights of the office hummed with a dull, almost hypnotic rhythm. Most of my colleagues had already left, their cheerful goodbyes fading into the hallway hours ago. Yet there I was, still hunched over my desk, typing furiously to finish a set of reports my boss, Ethan Parker, needed before morning. Ethan wasn't the kind of boss who barked orders or hovered over your shoulder. He had a calm, composed presence, the sort that made you want to do your best without being told. Still, he was demanding in his own subtle way, always expecting precision, always knowing when something could be better. Tonight, he'd been in his office for hours, the warm glow of his desk lamp spilling out through the cracked door. A quiet reminder that he, too, was still working. I rubbed my eyes and let out a quiet sigh. My neck ached from sitting in the same position too long. I was just about to shut down my computer when I heard his voice. "Still here?" I turned to see him leaning casually against the doorframe, one hand tucked into his pocket. His tie was loosened, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. And for the first time that day, he didn't look like the untouchable, perfectly put-together executive. "Yeah," I replied with a small smile. "Just finishing up the quarterly figures you asked for." He stepped into the room, his cologne drifting toward me, a subtle, warm scent I'd noticed before but never quite allowed myself to linger on. "You didn't have to stay this late," he said, though there was a hint of appreciation in his tone. "I was just about to head out myself." "I figured it was better to get it done tonight," I said, saving the file and closing my laptop. He nodded slowly, then tilted his head toward the large windows that overlooked the city. "Looks like the rain's stopped." I was thinking, after a day like this, maybe a drink wouldn't hurt. I blinked at him. "A drink?" "Yeah." He smiled, a rare, softer smile that wasn't his usual professional one. "You've been working hard all week. Let me buy you one. There's a little place around the corner. Not too loud, good atmosphere." I hesitated. Ethan had never suggested anything like this before. We'd spoken plenty during work hours, sometimes even joked about little things that happened in the office, but we'd never crossed into personal territory. Still, part of me, maybe the tired, restless part, wanted to say yes. "All right," I said after a moment, tucking my laptop into my bag. "But just one drink." The streets glistened from the earlier rain, reflecting the golden glow of street lamps as we walked side by side. Ethan didn't speak at first, but the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. There was a subtle awareness between us, an unspoken shift in energy I couldn't quite define. When we arrived, the place was exactly as he'd described: cozy, dimly lit, with deep leather booths and shelves of bottles glinting behind the bar. The low hum of conversation and the soft jazz in the background made it feel like we'd stepped out of the fast-paced city into a hidden pocket of calm. We slid into a booth near the back. I set my bag down beside me, feeling oddly self-conscious. Without my desk between us, he ordered us 2 glasses of red wine, his tone easy and confident as he spoke to the waitress. "So," he said once we were alone again, "I feel like I don't really know much about you outside of spreadsheets and deadlines." I laughed softly. "It's probably because I'm usually buried in spreadsheets and deadlines." "True," he said, with a chuckle. "But you have this quiet way of handling things. I've noticed it. You don't let chaos get to you." His words caught me off guard. Compliments from Ethan were rare, and this one felt personal, not just about my work performance, but about me. "Thanks," I said, looking down at my glass. I guess I try to keep my head down. Why? He asked, leaning forward slightly. You're smart. You have ideas. May, you should speak up more in meetings. There it was, again that subtle push. The way he seemed to see more in me than I'd ever shown him. It was both flattering and unnerving. The wine arrived, and we both took slow sips. He asked about my family, where I grew up, the kind of questions. That made me feel like we were on a different plane than the one we occupied in the office. In return, he told me about his early career, the risks he'd taken, the mistakes he'd made. I listened, fascinated, because this was Ethan without the shield of authority at one point. He laughed about a disastrous business trip years ago, and the sound genuine, warm made my chest tighten unexpectedly. I realized then that I was enjoying this far more than I should. Halfway through my second sip of wine, I caught him looking at Manat in a casual, passing way, but with an intentness that made me forget my next breath. I quickly glanced away, focusing on the flickering candle between us. It's strange, he said, after a moment, his voice quieter. I've seen you in that office every day for months, but tonight, you seem different. Different, how? I asked, my throat suddenly dry. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. More yourself. Or maybe I'm just finally noticing. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I laughed softly, a nervous reflex. Maybe it's just the wine. Maybe, he said. But there was something in his eyes that told me he didn't believe it. We talked for what felt like hours, though time seemed to move differently in that little booth. Eventually, I glanced at my phone and realized it was almost midnight. I should probably head home, I said, though part of me wasn't ready for the night to end. I'll walk you, he offered immediately. The air outside was cool and fresh, the rain-slick sidewalks gleaming under the streetlights. We walked slowly, our conversation quieter now, the pauses filled with a comfortable silence. At one point, our hands brushed. As we navigated around a puddle, I felt a jolt of awareness shoot through me. When we reached the corner where our paths would split, he stopped. For a moment, we just stood there, the city stretching out behind us, the night air thick with something unspoken. Thanks for coming with me, he said. It was nice. It was, I agreed, meeting his gaze for just a heartbeat too long. He smiled, that same softer smile from earlier, and then stepped back. Good night, I echoed, my voice quieter than I intended, as I walked away. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us that tonight was the start of something I couldn't quite name, but would soon be impossible to ignore.